Now, I wanted to think of something that's relevant, that people are interested in, and I thought, well, I don't know if you've noticed, but the church is in a period of crisis. I thought, well, particularly with the sexual abuse crisis, most people will be all ears to hear a take on that. First of all, let me tell you, I'm not as old as some of you. I'm older than some. But I've been more intimately involved in the church at the center of things than most of you. And I could tell you things that I've seen and witnessed and been treated by and seen other people treated by that would scandalize you beyond your wildest dreams. And also disillusion. Have I been disillusioned? You betcha. You betcha I've been disillusioned. But this is the million-dollar question that every Catholic needs to ask themselves. Where else is there to go? What's the alternative? I haven't come up with one yet. And that's why, in spite of everything, I remain a faithful, maybe not as faithful as I should be, but committed Catholic. And proudly so. That's a very important message to hear. Where else is there to go? The Catholic Church is doing an atrocious job. But you show me an institution that's doing better. Show me. You might have some trouble convincing me. That's the human condition. That's who we are. In fact, the Church makes no bones about it. That's why the Church is here, because humanity is in such a desperate need, in such desperate straits. At least the Church admits that. The secular world doesn't admit that. Oh, they admit that the Church is bad, but they don't look at what alternatives are there. What alternatives are there? Now, last time I spoke to you, I spoke to you about a favorite topic of mine, that we can't understand what the Church is, we can't understand who we are, unless we have a sound Christian, Catholic view of ourselves. You might call it anthropology. And I emphasized, and this will you'll start to remember, I hope, I spoke about how each one of us comprehensively are made up of 4 levels. We relate, we learn about God, we encounter God on 4 levels. These levels are really inseparable. We can separate them for the sake of speaking about them to help us understand, but they're really inseparable. Let's do some revision. Those of you that put up your hand that you've heard me before will now kick yourselves, because I know it's a quiz. What's the first and most basic level of who we are? Number one. What's the first and most basic level of who we are? Yes. Our bodies. So the physical. The physical bodies. Okay. What's the second level? Progressively, a little bit deeper, a little bit less direct, that defines who we are.
Emotion.
Emotion. Our emotional, we might call it our psychologies. Very good. What's the third level? Let's go a little bit deeper. The third level that defines who we are. Yes? Okay, you said the spiritual, so I'll put that down, but that's actually number 4. There's one in between. So certainly the deepest one, the most important, is the spiritual, or I like to call mystical dimension of who we are. Mystical. Okay, what's the one in between? What's number 3?
Relational?
Relational is complex. Relational, I think, all of them are relational. What's the third level in between? Not more important than the emotional, but less important than the spiritual. Yes?
Reason or intellect?
Yes, the intellectual. Intellectual human reason. Good. So, these are very, very important. As I said, they're intricately interwoven. They're inseparable, but for the sake of speaking, we can separate. Okay, now for those that have heard about this, and those of you that are recently now hearing about this, let's take this now to apply it, to make it concrete, so that we can begin to understand what this means. And in doing this, I'm hoping that what the Eastern churches, which I come from, in my case Eastern Catholic Church, just as Catholic as you, but I think we have an outlook that is somewhat less familiar to Western Christians, Protestants or Roman Catholics, and I think can be vitally important to addressing the crisis in the church at present. And that is that in the Eastern churches, for all sorts of historical reasons, a lot of them accidental, this one is very emphasized. Very emphasized. Now, Catholicism, Orthodoxy, East and West have all the 4 levels. But in the Eastern churches, where I come from, churches that are present now in Eastern Europe, the Middle East, and to some degree in Asia, and to some degree in the New World, emphasize this dimension a lot. And I think there lies the key to the malaise of the church. In the Western church, even in the Roman Catholic Church, unfortunately, for many hundreds of years now, the emphasis has been more on this level, the intellectual. And I think that's come to a dead end. Not that the intellectual is not important. They're all important. They're all important. But if you miss one of those levels, the whole thing doesn't make sense. All right, let's look now at talking about that specifically, so that, as I say, concretely, so that we can stretch out, and I will leave time for questions too, so if you have questions, write them down. Let's look at it now concretely with respect to the modern crisis in the church and seek to apply these levels to see what I'm talking about. For the first time in several hundred years, there is a Roman Catholic cardinal who is in prison in Australia, the country where I grew up. His name is Cardinal George Pell. I've known him and met him since he was a priest. I wouldn't say I've known him well, but I've known him and spoken with him from the days when he was just a priest. Cardinal Pell. First time in 100 years or more that a Roman Catholic cardinal is in prison. He's being accused of molesting two boys when they were, I think, 10 or 11, something like that. They might have been a bit older. That's what he's accused of. The verdict is dividing the country. The verdict is dividing the country. So let's look at this a bit more closely. All right. First of all, what's the problem? The problem is physical. He's been accused of sexually molesting two boys. So the physical is important, comes into play. However, it seems that in modern Christianity, the physical, especially to do with sex, is everything, is paramount, is what most people think religion is about, primarily. We have our own version of Cardinal Pell, a little bit different with Cardinal McCarrick. That's a little bit different, I'll explain why in a minute. And I read a historical element that said, well, in the Middle Ages, when a priest or a bishop or a cardinal was condemned by the church, they would try him in the church. If he was found guilty, this is the Roman Catholic Church, particularly in the Middle Ages, if he was found guilty, they would scrape his fingers and his palms where the chrism was put during ordination, so that he would cease to be a cleric. And then they would hand him over and rip out his tonsure. And then they would hand him over to the civil authorities to be dealt with. Well, that's not going to happen to Cardinal McCarrick. And what they didn't mention, this is very strange to our, they're quick to make reference to that. But in fact, the most serious crime were, yes, rape and murder, but not as important as heresy, wrong belief, dissension from church teaching. Now, I'm sure many modern Roman Catholics would like to see Cardinal McCarrick's palms scraped and his fingertips scraped, because the sin is a physical sin, particularly about sex, this obsession. But that's not the way it's been seen. Not too many modern Roman Catholics would think that should be done to clergy that are heretical or have heretical teaching. God forbid to mention heresy is a no-no. It's not politically correct. So all of a sudden we see the complexity of the situation. We put more importance on the physical, particularly the sexual. That's something that's not important, but it's become absolute. If someone's committed a sexual sin, they should go to, particularly with, and I agree. But with respect to heresy, nobody batters an eyelid. Nobody cares. That is not Catholicism. Plain and simple. That is humanism. At best, Protestantism. That's number one. Number two, with respect to Cardinal Pell. Oh yes, the emotional. There's outrage. Outrage. Sadness. Anger. Absolute outrage. And the media, of course, are playing that up to the hilt. Playing that up to the hilt. In fact, Cardinal Pell, because he is a conservative Catholic and outspoken and very critical of politically correct positions, especially with respect to abortion and same-sex marriage, has been persecuted by the media and has gotten bad press and the progressive element of the Australian culture and even Australian church for 20 years. And in those 20 years, they've attempted time and time again to pin on him that he was quiet about abusive priests, that he was not honest, that he was this, that he was that. Nothing has stuck. Now. And there's outrage. The victims, these poor kids, outrage. This has been going for years. Outrage. The trouble is, if we stop there at these two levels, it's only the superficial truth. It's not Christianity, and it certainly ain't Catholicism. In fact, Cardinal Pell, this is what people are arguing, has really basically been tried by the media. He was tried in December, I think it was December, might have been earlier September or something. And he was found, and the jury deadlocked in his favour, 10-2. Now, in most cases, with those conditions, the judge would dismiss the case against him. But because of who he is, and the publicity, and the media hype, no. They chose to retry him again in secret this time. In secret. A lot of people are saying this is unjust. You don't get the verdict you want, then you just retry him until you get the right verdict that you want. Legal experts, using the intellectual reason, not the emotional, the intellectual reason, legal experts, both nationally and internationally, tell us the case is not sound against him. If it was anyone else, it would have been dismissed. That's the consensus. It's going on because of outrage, which is fed by the media. Now, I don't know whether Cardinal Pell is guilty or not. It's certainly not the Cardinal Pell I know. And none of us can ever know whether it's true or false. All we can do is rely on the court, which is to rely on the evidence, this human reason, this intellectual. And every legal scholar has said the case does not stand up. The jury voted guilty because they were manipulated by the media, as the culture was, as society was. For example, the witness, in most cases of a serious crime like that, they have to be witnesses. This has no witnesses except the victim. None. There is accusation that he abused two boys and the other, but the only one that can vouch for that is the one victim that's gone to court. That victim, who's the only one that gave evidence, for dealing with his third victim. That victim, who was the only one that gave evidence only through videotape in a closed court. Nobody knows who his identity is. It's the first time ever in the Australian legal system that anyone has been found guilty on such spurious evidence. One witness, and he's the victim. The details of what Cardinal Pell is accused of doing are bizarre. He's accused of doing this. No children here, so I can feel safe. He's accused, soon after he was made Archbishop of Melbourne, the second biggest city in Australia, after Mass, after a solemn high Mass, there was a choir, people, he was accompanied by an MC, observers and other clergy, that when the Mass was over, he didn't go in the procession, he slipped out into the sacristy. Huge sacristy, St. Patrick's Cathedral is a huge cathedral, it's open, there's no doors. And he's accused that he went into the sacristy and in there found these two choir boys who in turn had sneaked out from the choir without being seen. And were drinking altar wine in the sacristy. He saw them fully vested, and he abused them then and there within a period of 10 minutes. He never knew the boys before, never had any contact with them. There's no other evidence that he's abused anyone before. St. Patrick's Cathedral, there's no doors, it would have been with people walking around. In his vestments, actually that they performed oral sex on him. If I'm fully vested, I can hardly go to the toilet. You can't, let alone in 10 minutes, get two boys. And then, the story goes, they slipped back into the choir and went to choir practice. And nobody noticed that they were gone. There's no other witnesses. Nobody can remember Cardinal Pell not going to the door at the procession like normal to greet the people. Nobody can remember these boys, these two boys, but only one is giving evidence, missing from choir practice. It's all speculation. Now, how you can get a conviction on those flimsy terms is beyond me. And of course, there are agendas. Yes, the Church has made many mistakes, but you can't tell me that the sole voice in secular culture nowadays, there's almost the sole voice against abortion, against same-sex marriage, against sexual promiscuity, the lone voice of any substance is the Catholic Church. You can't tell me that there isn't an agenda for elements of the secular culture to want to silence that voice, to want to discredit that voice. I don't believe that. Now, I'm not going to give you, I'm not talking about Cardinal Pell. I'm talking about the importance of using number 3 human reason. And the sad fact, this is the problem, the sad fact is that most Christians, we basically have relied on a cultural Christianity for too long, and a cultural Catholicism. Most Christians, and even most Catholics, only relate their faith on the first 2 levels. That's the problem. They don't know the teaching of the Church, they don't appreciate the teaching of the Church, they're not going to use their intellect to judge for themselves. They're going to react on sensationalism in the media, emotion. That's what's going to happen. And that's the source of the problem. Now, before I round up and offer some time for questions, I want to get to why I'm speaking about it. It's from the Eastern churches and what the Eastern churches have to offer. What the Eastern churches have to offer is that I believe Christians, and specifically Catholics, have neglected the intellect both in the explaining of their faith and of the practice of their faith, because the spiritual and the mystical has been neglected for so long, and then the intellectual becomes dry and empty, of little interest to anyone. Young people will often tell us this. They'll say, I am spiritual but not religious. What they mean is they want this. They've heard all that, and they're not convinced. They want this. And Western Christianity, by and large, for the past few hundred years, has not given them this, but has concentrated on that. That is where the church needs reform. That is where the church has failed miserably. And now we're paying the consequences. And so, as Eastern Catholics, as Eastern Christians, small churches, compared to the Roman Catholic Church, were as old as the Roman Catholic Church. We didn't always used to be smaller, we were bigger for the first 1,000 years of the church. I think what we can offer is the reminder of this fourth level and how important it is that if you leave that out, the whole thing goes off balance. I think that's where we're at. I think that's precisely where we're at. That's why there's so much polarity in the church, the conservative and the progressive, right? Because the progressive and conservative are fighting an unbeatable battle on this level. That's where they're stuck. And they will continue to be stuck there unless they can get a glimpse of the fourth level. And the church begins to take that fourth level more seriously in her worship, in her spiritual life, the Western Church, in her practice of the faith. I could be wrong. I'm prejudiced. I'm an Eastern, of course I am. But I think what I'm saying is not totally off the planet either. It could be an insight to address the deep, deep crisis of the church at the moment. It's a different way of saying prayer is the answer, of course. But we go further than that in explaining. Now, I'm not saying, this is what I say to young people, without being spiritual, without being religious. I say to them, yes, it's good that you want this and you haven't been fed that. But you can't be spiritual and not be religious. You have to have the four. You can't pretend you're spiritual and be promiscuous. You can't pretend you're spiritual and emotionally be an emotional infant. You can't be spiritual and be completely ignorant of what the church teaches. But it is true that you can have these three and not be spiritual. And that's a problem. And, at least in awareness, I think that's where most Catholics in Western cultures are at. That's a problem. Okay. I am sure there's going to be some good questions and good discussion. I can see it in your faces. So don't disappoint me. What I will do is you can raise your hand to ask a question or make a comment. It might be easier if before you say it, if if I come to you and hold the microphone so that everyone, because the answer won't make sense unless people have heard the question. Any brave souls ready to ask a question or say something? And I don't bite. Well, this early in the morning. Okay, good.
Father Nicholas, you know Bishop Brickett very well. And I really feel that with Bishop Brickett telling his own story now and asking us to become disciples, he's pointing to first fix your own or deepen your own relationship with God. So he is focusing on the spiritual and mystical. And I think that, especially in this area of the country and in this diocese, that we are looking to the right direction.
Oh, I couldn't agree with you more. Relational, when we talk about relationship, of course we have to be careful that people aren't talking just about this. It has to be relational about this too. Relationship with God, mystical relationship with God, in prayer, not just feel good, not just what therapists can deal with. Has to be mystical, has to be deep, has to be spiritual. I couldn't agree with you more, and that's why there are two reasons why our monastery came to St. Nathan's. Two main reasons. We were looking for a place to go, and there was an ideal place available. St. Mary's Convent was there for 150 years, but became available. Number one. The second reason was Bishop Ricken went so much out of his way to bring us to his diocese. Now, canonically, we're not part of his diocese, you know, but in the area, he's like our second bishop. And he begged us to come. Promised the world. Hasn't quite given us that yet, but he promised it. He really, really wanted us. He said, I really want a monks monastery in my diocese. How do you get a monks monastery? Benedictine monks these days. He said, you guys will have to do the job. Because you're monks, but you're Eastern. And we said, we'll do it. And that's why we have a wonderful partnership with the Diocese of Green Bay, even though we canonically don't belong to the Diocese of Green Bay. So I couldn't agree with you more. Bishop Ricken is a very deep, spiritual man that understands all this. Absolutely. Absolutely. And he knows a lot about the Eastern churches, and some of you probably don't know, when he was a seminarian, he took a year off and went and lived in a contemplative monastery to strengthen his vocation. He's a very deep... Not all the American bishops are of that caliber, unfortunately, if only they were. Any other questions? Points of discussion? Boy, if it's not clear what I've said. Spiriters, they always make a good contribution.
So you said that like the Western Church, we aren't quite as good at that spiritual level.
They don't emphasize it.
Could you maybe give just some like practical ways for just like the everyday kind of person to kind of immerse themselves in that level more, since we don't see it as much?
Visit monasteries, lots of monasteries, like ours, like the Carmelite sisters in Denmark, right? Reading the fathers of the church, the desert fathers, the great saints of the church. Encouraging in your parishes, I know this is tricky, this is controversial. Encourage in your parishes that the worship become, I would say, somewhat more spiritual and mystical. Maybe it means somewhat more traditional. Not always necessarily. But it is true that the pre-Vatican II Church did used to, for better or for worse, did emphasize this fourth level more. Not as much as in Eastern churches, even before Vatican II, the Western Church emphasizes third level more than any other. But before Vatican II, at least liturgically, in the Western Church, I think there was more of an emphasis on the fourth level. And no matter what people say, I do not believe the Second Vatican Council changed that one iota. The interpretation and implementation did. But I can't see anywhere in what the fathers of the Second Vatican Council said specifically to say that in any way they wanted to lessen the emphasis on this. That's what happened. But that was for accidental reasons. And I think that has to be looked at. Now that's not your job. It's the job of bishops. But we can make them aware of it. And young people are. In the Catholic Church, young people have either left the church, or the ones that are left are very spiritual and traditional. That's it. Because they're not cultural Catholics who are just there because mum and dad who don't really care. They have to defend their faith to keep it now. That's the way of the future. A smaller, more vibrant church. The sooner we recognize that and the sooner we invest in that, the more chances we have of not getting down to almost non-existence before a renewal. Any other questions, comments? Yes.
I can speak loud enough.
He's a big mouth.
What's your take on the bishops' meeting in Rome? Do you think they're just going to be tied up in 2 and 3 the whole time they're there? Is anything good going to come out of it?
Oh yes, yes. However, yes, absolutely. On the third level, a lot has gone into it, and a lot of progress. The trouble is, most Catholics, at least in America, don't care very much about the third level. They care about the second. They're angry, and they want an immediate solution. Well, that's fine, except that that's not possible on the third level. And the bishop's task can't knee-jerk, although the American bishops tried before they got slapped down by Rome, because they want to. But that's not reality. That's how you make things worse, by jumping in before. Yes, a lot of good things have come from the most important one they've tried to do is they've tried in Rome for the first time to say, look, we have to, if we're going to get anywhere on this third level, we have to try and focus and narrow down what we're dealing with. Otherwise, we're just going to go in circles. Now, this is controversial, but a lot of elements, more traditional elements in the Roman Catholic Church, for better or for worse, have been trying to tell us that this is not a problem of pedophilia, but this is a problem of homosexuality. The Vatican said, we're not going to deal with that. It might be and it might not be, but we have to stick and focus, otherwise we're going to go around in circles and argue about things that are not specific related. We're only going to talk about sexual abuse of minors, full stop. We're going to get focused. Otherwise, we're just going to go in circles. And I think that was a very good move. The more focused we can become, the more progress we can make on this intellectual level. And some of the critics, you know, the argument is, well, how can you explain that most priests are, you know, prey on young men? Some of the victims have said, even women victims, that is absolutely not true. That's what we hear about. Some of the big victims have said, no, unfortunately, it's equal numbers of men and women that are being abused. That's coming out more and more now. By making it a homosexual homosexual problem, you are evading responsibility of how big a problem it actually is. And that's dangerous. That was another good thing that I think came out of it. Although it didn't come from the bishops, it came out from these abuse people that criticised the larger agenda, which I think was good. So was it perfect? No. I think Cardinal Donato gave it a B+ assessment. Yeah, that's a good assessment. But it's very complex. It's a hard examination. Yes, you can be outraged about it. Will you show me someone that's doing better? Show me. Public schools, scouting, athletics, sports. You show me someone that's doing more. Other churches? Show me. Another good thing I always forgot. One sad thing in this whole thing is that people use agendas, particularly conservative Catholics too, but particularly progressive Catholics use this as an agenda for their other agendas, which I think is dishonest. To use abuse victims for other agendas, I think is absolutely hypocritical. The one they use it, of course, the biggest one they use it, of course, is they single out the Catholic Church, because the Catholic Church is the only one that has a celibate priesthood. So it's all got to do with celibacy. Well, even these victims have said it's got nothing to do with celibacy. There's as much sexual abuse of minors, most of it happens actually in the family, amongst married couples. It's got nothing to do with celibacy. That was another very important thing, I think, because then the Catholic Church is in a it's the only institution that promotes clerical celibacy. Even in Eastern churches we don't. We have a married priest. Most of our priests are married. We have married priests and we have monk priests. And the bishop is chosen from the monk priests. But we have what? The majority of priests in the Eastern Orthodox and Eastern Catholic churches are married men who are ordained to the priesthood. They can't get married after they're ordained, but before ordination, a bit like deacons, they can be married and then be ordained. So we have both monk priests and married priests, and the bishops are always chosen from the monk priests. Any other comments? You don't have such a big mouth, so you'll have
You mentioned a few things in response to her question about what individuals could do on the spiritual level. What, if anything, are you seeing that the institutional church is doing to go that way, or aren't we going that way?
I think the most dramatic element I see is that, as I say, amongst the younger generation, there is a desire to rediscover, especially in the life of worship in the church, a more mystical approach, sometimes more traditional, though not necessarily. And there are small elements that's been, Pope Benedict certainly pushed that. John Paul, not as much, and Pope Francis probably not as much interested in that, because South America is very different. But I think I see that as a encouraging sign that amongst the younger generation there is a much push, particularly in worship, of more traditional style of Catholicism. And I see it in young priests too. The reason, that I was ordained in 1986, 87. At that stage, all the bishops and all the major superiors and all the priests that were already priests, Holus, Vatican II has been sold, everything, free love and very casual liturgy and all that kind of stuff. Amongst the younger generation now, I haven't met one young priest that thinks like that. Not one. There are fewer priests. I haven't met one. They're all very traditional. They all, not completely and uncritically, but see there was a lot of wisdom, tradition, holiness that we've tossed out the window. Irresponsible. And Vatican II didn't ask for that. They did not. That was people's interpretation of Vatican II. Yes.
I'll be loud enough, I think. Father, with the emphasis on the Eastern Church on spiritual, right? What are the statistics for the Eastern Church as it regards all of these sexual accusations and so forth? What is the response of the laity? Is the laity truly more spiritual?
Well, that's hard to gauge, but I can tell you now, in the Eastern churches, there is a much less emphasis on morality, and particularly sexual morality. It doesn't mean they don't believe in it, but they don't get as hung up about it. They say, as bad as it is, let's just not get too out of perspective and still concentrate on this. That's very common. That's why if you go to a liturgy in Eastern churches, you see it's much more traditional, much more mystical than the Western church. That's where they put the emphasis. They say it's not just about morality, it's not just about sexual morality, as important as that is, but if we get the fundamentals, there's no point talking about sexual morality or morality. We're not Christians anymore, we're just humanists. I must say, I'm prejudiced because I'm an Easterner, but it's a compelling argument.
But wouldn't that live it out into the other?
Yes, absolutely. We can't take that too far. Yes, absolutely. It doesn't mean, yes. The four have to go together. The four have to be emphasized. Yes. Will I have to come to you, or I will be softly spoken to?
What about theologians where the writings are between Eastern and Western? Is there a difference?
Oh, absolutely. And one of the interesting signs of the present is because of history, because in the second millennium of the church, most of the scholarship and resources and wealth and influence has been the Western church, and Vatican II is an example of that. Many Western theologians, great Western theologians, have rediscovered and are re-emphasizing the Eastern perspective on things for the Western church as a way of renewing it. De Lubac, Pope Benedict, Hans von Balthasar, all the great theologians are re-emphasizing the patristic or the Eastern flavor of our church as opposed to the more medieval scholastic approach of the Latin church in the second millennium. They're saying we have to go back in our history. That doesn't mean we forget St. Thomas Aquinas in the second 1,000 years, but neither can we forget the first 1,000 years, which the Latin church to a large degree did by about the 16th century. So absolutely there's difference. The Eastern and Western churches are the same apostolic faith, particularly in the case of the Catholic ones, it's complete communion with each other, but the spirituality is different, the liturgy is different, the theology is different, canon law is different, the monastic life is different. Now, we're not saying we want to make Easterners out of the Westerners, but what we are saying is you've come to a crisis. This is what we think is part of the problem. Take it or leave it, we can't fix your problems for you. From our perspective, this is what we see.
You mentioned the importance of, we emphasize the spiritual in the Western Church, but I think much of this is already happening from the grassroots. I think if you look at the adoration chapels tonight.
Correct, that's a big sign, absolutely.
So
That is one of the most encouraging signs. You know, when I was a young priest, all those that were bishops and priests would poo-poo benediction with the Blessed Sacrament as a past devotion it's made a comeback, particularly amongst young people. That is a very dramatic example of, yes, I couldn't agree with you. That's probably, for me, that's one of the most dramatic examples of renewing the faith from the richness of its tradition. And young people, because young people don't have silence anymore, ever. It's new to them. It's an old thing. Absolutely. Thank you for mentioning that. I think that's a dramatic sign. Yes.
There are some people that are very excited about the possibility of resuming the Latin Mass, creating separate priests and whatnot. Do you see this as positive or negative?
That's a difficult question. In some ways it's positive, but it can be abused and misused. Overall, I think it's positive. Overall. But I don't think it's the complete answer or the sole answer. I certainly don't believe that. A lot of very traditional Latin Catholics are very triumphalistic, and they hate the Eastern churches. The old Roman Catholic triumphalism in the 16th century, the Council of Trent. It depends. It's not an easy question to answer. Overall, I think it's a good thing, but it can be abused. We have to be very careful. All right, Kevin's coming up, stalking upon me, which means I think that time is up.
I could pull the mic. Yeah, we have people that need to get mass, so let's say thank you. I think there's more to talk about. Thank you very much. A couple people still need to coffee, probably is just waiting. So thank you. Make it a good day and let's do this.
Right.
Yep, there was some really interesting things on.
Well, yes.
It seems to me,
I remember when
Do you want a bag for that? I brought some bags along.
Yeah, I just figured that.
Okay. Yeah.
Want some more, Kevin? Or
I'm good. Thank you.
you don't want to reach out.